the ones who get it done.
The sun can make your outdoor deck and patio space so hot and uncomfortable you can't use it. But now there's the Sunsetter retractable awning. It provides protection from the sun's harmful rays and can keep your patio about 20 degrees cooler. Call 800-327-7779 now, and you can get your Sunsetter for as little as $5.99 with your special $200 discount certificate. Call 800-327-7779 now for your discount certificate, and you'll also get a free awning idea kit. Call 800-327-7779. That's 800-327-7779.
NBC News Radio, I'm Tom Roberts. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is angrily firing back after being accused of stonewalling. In a Senate hearing today, Sessions dismissed criticism from Oregon Democrat Ron Wyden and said he has a right not to divulge the contents of private conversations with President Trump. He also told Virginia Democrat Mark Warner that he and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein talked about the firing of then FBI Director James Comey.
Senator Warner, we had talked about it even before I was confirmed and before he was confirmed. It's something that we both agreed to, that a fresh start at the FBI was probably the best.
Should Special Counsel Robert Mueller be fired? Deputy AG Rosenstein says he's seen no good cause to do so.
Rosenstein told a Senate hearing that he would only fire Mueller if he were given lawful and appropriate orders to do so.
Special Counsel Mueller may be fired only for good cause, and I am required to put that cause in writing.
He was responding to buzz that President Trump may be thinking about ordering Mueller's dismissal. In Washington, I'm Terry Moore, NBC News Radio.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson confirms an American student has been released from captivity in North Korea. Otto Warmbier has served about a year of a 15-year sentence for allegedly removing a sign of the late dictator Kim Jong-il. Tillerson did not comment on Warmbier's condition. A spokesman for Bill Cosby says the comedian didn't get a fair trial. Andrew Wyatt says a key defense witness was blocked from testifying in Cosby's sex assault trial. A jury continues to deliberate Cosby's fate. President Trump says the Senate is working to give Americans a better alternative for health care.
It's time to give American families quality, reliable, affordable health care, and that's what we are working very hard to do.
In Wisconsin, the president claimed that no matter what plan is presented to repeal and replace Obamacare, not one obstructionist Democrat will vote for it. The Food and Drug Administration is delaying indefinitely the release of new nutrition labels. You're listening to the latest from NBC News Radio.
From the KCAA Weather Center, I'm Tom Ladd. For this afternoon, it'll be sunny. Expect a high near 87. West wind at 5 to 15 and gusts as high as 20. Clear tonight with a low of 61. West wind at 5 to 10 and gusts as high as 20 once again. Wednesday's outlook sunny, high near 94. Light southwest wind at 5 to 10 and gusts as high as 20. That's your weather forecast for this hour from KCAA 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM. 3 and 1, the trifecta of talk in Southern California.
KCAA. Welcome to Smart Health Talk with your host, Elaine McFadden.
Take a walk on the wild side. Will the birds and the bees survive? Right before me, my newfound hippie side. Once ignored these conspiracies online. Out the window, visions of the earth. Sign me up now, make sure you use your smart. Take a walk on the wild side. Will the birds and the bees survive? Would your children lie to see Mother Nature sigh?
Welcome to Smart Health Talk with your host, Elaine McFadden.
Welcome, everyone. This is Smart Health Talk Radio Show, and we're so glad to have you. Hope you're going to be sticking with us this entire hour because we're going to be talking healthcare here, and I don't think there's anyone in this country because we're not invincible, let's face it, that does not need a health care plan. And believe it or not, countries like Canada that are actually starting to step up to the plate to take the United States' place as a world leader, and they have universal health care. So Canada, the country that wants to take the place of United States, already has universal health care. That means 100% of their population is covered with health care. Can you imagine that, getting up in the morning and not having to worry about if you get sick or you're not going to have enough money for your medications that keep you alive, that if you have an accident that you're okay? I mean, how would that feel like? I mean, I don't even know. And what is a good health care plan? What, as American citizens, should we be asking for? We should have this down. We should be saying, hey, you better be not like discriminating against us because of some pre-existing condition, because I'm pregnant, because I'm a woman, you know. I mean, all of these kind of things should not be a reason because you don't have enough to pay. You know, there are lots of responsible people in this country that have been stricken with a major healthcare crisis. And this is happening more and more. And why is that? Because we are poisoning ourselves. We're poisoning our planet, our water, our food. It's crazy. And we, you know, what do we do here? Well, first of all, we have to start off knowing what is it that we want? What are we going to be asking for? We should have our list of must-haves as part of our healthcare system. We should have that down backwards and forwards. We want this, we want this, we want this, and if it doesn't have that, you can forget it. Why are we letting the government dictate to us what our wants and needs are? As American people, we need to stand up and be telling our government that's using our taxpayer money, this is what we want in a healthcare system. And until we find that voice, and until, first of all, we even figure it out, what is it we want? Well, we have an incredible guest with us today. Hey, Brandon. Brandon's on we have Zach Calvier. He is on the line right now, and he is our healthcare expert. He's our go-to guy. He has worked for a long list. I mean, I want to get right to it. There are some things in the news that are going on too. We'll see if we have time for that. But first of all, this is our prime directive, because this should be every citizen in this country, this should be their prime directive. Exploring the facts. What are the facts really? When we take away the pressure of special interests, when we take away the pressure of advertisers, big money, big corporate, you know, what is the real truth? We're digging down that deep, everybody. Yeah, we're wiping away all that other stuff. We don't even have anything to do with that. We're getting right down to the nitty-gritty of, hey, these are the facts. And from that, together as American citizens, as a country, we are going to decide what we want in our health care program. We're not going to just sit back and let government and insurance companies and special interests and big corporate tell us what we want. That's what I want to see. I want to see the American public fired up, because this, everybody, is a life and death situation. Go ahead, Brandon. Can you play that bit? This is what we talked about last week, everybody. When we have an American that's not covered with health care, that's one too many, because we have that is like a life and death situation.
Hearing on the health care proposal?
I think we've already had one, but...
No, I mean on the proposal that you're planning to bring to the floor of the Senate for a vote. Will there be a hearing?
Well, I don't know that there's going to be another hearing, but we've invited you to participate.
When you say that you're inviting us, and I heard you, Mr. Secretary, just say we'd love your support, for what? We don't even know. We have no idea what's being proposed. There's a group of guys in a back room somewhere that are making these decisions.
Yeah. We wanted to start off there. This is a recent broadcast, recent Senate hearing. The bottom line is, everyone, we have not a clue. We do not know diddly of what the heck is going on with our health care program. All right? That is why we have to come together right now, right this very minute, and we have to figure out what the heck do we want in our health care program. Number one, I am proposing that every single person in this country is covered. I don't care what their age is. I don't care about their ethnicity, their gender, how sick they are, predisposing conditions. I don't care about any of that. I want every person in this country covered. And guess what? Other countries are doing it, so I know it is possible. And we have Zach here. Hey, Zach. Zach Calvier, and he is our okay, thank you. He is our go-to guy. Okay, and that's Caldveer, correct? At least I got the spelling right. Okay, and he is our go-to guy because he has worked for so many different nonprofit agencies that are out there fighting for us, the American people. And that is what he is interested in. That's what he's looking for. He is looking for the truth as it relates to us, and guess what? Saving lives. Because if you're not covered with health insurance, you are at risk of dying needlessly because you could not get care, or you could end up in bankruptcy, because that's what you taught me last week, Zach, isn't it? That's like the biggest reason for bankruptcy is health care.
It is. It's the number one cause of bankruptcy, and it's also the fastest growing sector in terms of government spending, which is about 7% a year. So we're talking about a fifth of all United States spending is going towards healthcare. So these are runaway costs that are going to affect our future ability not just to provide healthcare to Americans, but to pay for all kinds of other services and benefits that we need and deserve.
Well, go ahead. Why don't you just let's get into it, Zach, man. I wanna educate our listeners here on what is going on, because you heard that clip, right? Where we have people in Congress right now, and they're just kind of like, what the heck, man? What is going on here? What are you guys up to? And like she said, it's a group of men, behind some closed door deciding the fate of, every person in this country practically, unless you're loaded with money and you can afford whatever health care you want, which I don't think is the majority of Americans, is it, Zach?
No, it's not. In fact, I think this is a common occurrence in today's political landscape, which is what Americans really want and deserve and need are usually the opposite of what is taking place in state capitals and in Washington, D.C. Day in and day out, which tells us a lot about the level of crises that we're in terms of our political system. And I think when you ask what do we want, get people to ask the question, what do we want and what do we deserve, I think is a great place to start, because I would argue one of the crises that we face are that so many Americans have really been lulled into a dangerous sense of complacency, despair, disillusionment, and even confusion over what is real and what is not. And that means they started to tune out because many are working longer hours for less money. It's harder to make ends meet. So they start becoming too busy to bother caring about politics anymore, believing their vote doesn't count, their opinion doesn't matter, they don't have any time, and their choice of leaders are uninspiring. And then you add on to that the constant bombardment of our mass media culture, whether it's advertising and reality TV shows, and even the mass media itself, which is a profit-driven industry controlled by a handful of giant corporations that increasingly care more about ratings than providing the public with the information needed to be effective, critically thinking citizens. So the result is coverage driven by hours on end of scandal, murder, tragedy, tabloid journalism, and anything else that quenches our society's insatiable thirst for entertainment. Because the more exciting the news, the higher the ratings and the larger the profit. So I start with that because that's why your question is so important, because we want to cut through all that and really get to people and say, what do we deserve as tax-paying citizens in the richest country on earth? Now, far be it for me to tell people what they deserve, but I would ask people to go back and look at Franklin Roosevelt's 1944, just before he passed away, what he was proposing, a second Bill of Rights. And before we get to what do we deserve about health care, I think this is a very useful tool. And he laid out a plan to make access to employment, food, clothing, farmers' rights to a fair income, freedom from unfair competition and monopolies, housing, medical care, Social Security, and education as human rights. Now, 60, 70, 80 years later, we have none of these, and we've gone backwards. And I would actually argue that for all those who say that none of these can be done are likely the ones getting rich off not doing it.
Can I ask you a question, Zach? Because I would like to know, when we look back in history, when those rights were being fulfilled, was that a profitable time in our history for the American people?
Well, that's part of the irony in this, is that those were the 40s, 50s, and 60s were the time when our economy was the most equitable, had the most growth, had the strongest middle class, and that's precisely why in the last 30 years, 40 years since the quote-unquote Reagan Revolution, have the wealthy elite and corporate interests sought in all kinds of different ways that I probably can't go into all today to stop the momentum that was building in building a strong, educated middle class, because that's really not what they want. That's not the way you build a society.
Why don't, and who's they, and why don't they want that?
Well, there's a very handful of corporations in each industry that profit off keeping people uneducated, and kind of like, Noam Chomsky talks a lot about training the workforce to be obedient workers, not to question the current reality, not to question how much money is in the hands of the wealthiest people. And so I think a lot of it was just enough. They just didn't feel like they had enough. They wanted more. And they didn't like seeing a growing middle class, because that was, look at the wealthy, the super rich back in the 50s were taxed at 92% after a certain amount of millions that they made. So the tax rate was super high compared to now, yet the economy was booming. Corporations paid 30% of the total tax revenues back then. Now they pay 10%. Workers were unionized, so they were getting better pay, better health care packages. So there's a very small, very powerful elite that don't want those things. They want the cheapest workforce they can have, so they want free trade agreements.
Well, I know McDonald's is feeling the pressure because they've just come out with new commercials where they give the appearance that they care about their workers going to college.
Yeah.
And I noticed they made it, and it was a good commercial because they can pay the big money, for the top people. And yeah, they kind of rip at your emotions, make you feel something. Oh, they got into the college, thanks. And McDonald's, helped them get there, kind of a thing. But that is so far, I would guess that, I would like to know what percentage of fast food workers go on to college. I can see where that could be a bridge type job, you know, from high school to college, but after college, I mean, after high school, I would just wonder how many people actually go on to higher paying jobs, you know, from that. I mean, because then again, I'm trying to ask the questions, you know, like what should we be, you know, asking for? How do we change these things where we're not just becoming complacent and giving into these robot type jobs where we're willing to work. And I hear people working like 3 jobs, Zach. 3 jobs to be able to support their family and to make ends meet. And then they're not there for their kids, so their kids are at home alone. And all of that starts to cascade into other types of things that cost our entire system a lot of money. And we're going to get into more of, you know, that not only what do we want in a health care bill, everyone, the kind of things we should be asking for, but how do we pay for this? Because, you know, I just feel like, Zach, that we are given the impression that these things are just, they're unattainable. We can't have this. Why are you even wishing for this? Don't even bother going there. Are you kidding? You know, and you know, what should we think when we hear those kind of things, when they're telling us that kind of talk? You can't have this. It's unattainable. What should we be thinking when we hear that?
Well, for one, our history has been defined by American generations in the past that have successfully risen up to challenge and change the country for the better under what seemingly were insurmountable odds. I would say from achieving independence and the Constitution to overcoming slavery to women's suffrage at a time when there wasn't a single woman in Congress, to desegregation and voting rights. We're going backwards on that a little bit, but to the peace and environmental movements, and to current day movements like Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, the Fight for 15, which is partly why McDonald's is probably doing that ad that you're talking about, because there has been pressure from people that are making a difference. So I also think that by asking the question that you're asking and getting people to realize that in the richest country in the world, where the top 0.1% of Americans have more money than the bottom 90%, that we deserve basic human rights. And that includes food, clothing, and, as we're going to talk about a little bit, health care. And I think you set up the health care argument really well, and we did get into Medicare for All back on the May 30th show, so I don't know how much we can go into that. But, of course, when you talk about how can we pay for it, I mean, there is plenty of money to go about paying for every American to have basic human needs taken care of. And that's, again, because so much wealth is concentrated in the top 0.1% of Americans, that so much money is spent on 17 years now of wars around the world. In fact, actually, it's more like 50 years straight.
How much money is that? Can we even fathom it? That has been spent on war?
Since 2002, about $1.8 trillion on wars. And that's in addition to the $679 billion a year we're proposing, especially under the Trump budget, to spend on war. I mean, to spend on the defense budget this year, but that doesn't even take into account the costs we spend for Homeland Security, the NSA, the CIA. So when you put that all together, we spend almost $1 trillion on what I call the fear industrial complex, because it's really more than just the military and industrial complex anymore. A lot of it is based and run on fear, and it's based and it's run for profit as well. So there is plenty of money to pay for Medicare for all and to create the kind of community conditions that would improve the health and prevent injuries and illnesses before they occur, which is another one of those key questions that what do we want and what do we deserve that I was going to touch on.
But do we actually as Americans have a say-so in that? Because like if we were like looking at everything laid out on the table, we're going to spend the money in all these different ways, and we're like looking at it and going, you're going to like spend, you know, how much on defense, and like what are you spending it on? You know, why can't we spend it on health care and programs to feed our kids at school, which we know, you know, actually there's, you know, so many public health programs that for every dollar we spend, we're saving money because it prevents things from happening. And we're taking away these dollars now. To me, it's like taking from the poor and giving to the rich. That's what I feel like is happening right now.
Well, I mean, if you talk about the Trump healthcare proposal combined with his budget, I mean, it's the most massive transfer of wealth from the people to big corporations and the rich in human history. And
what?
So,
really? It's the biggest transfer in human history where we're taking from the American, the average American people and giving it to the rich? I just can't even believe it that that's really happening.
I mean, I can go through some of the numbers. They're mind-numbing, particularly when you contrast it to the 2 points that we want to say about what we think we should deserve and what we want about healthcare. These are actually going backwards. I mean, we're talking about his healthcare plan. Of course, it's not healthcare. It's really a $663 billion tax cut that goes to the top 2%. But I mean, we're talking about stripping 23 million Americans of their coverage, cutting Medicaid by $800 billion, which of course hits poor Americans the hardest, especially children.
And the elderly, probably. Or is that Medi-Cal? I get those mixed up.
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of programs, and this is part of why Medicare for All program is so much better than what we currently have, because there's so many different bureaucracies, so many different programs that takes away our bargaining and purchasing power as American consumers, because they break us up into all these different groups, both.
That is a good point, Zach. I mean, I really think that you're hitting on the key right there. Because I've seen this with big management companies and food service that are like global. They just use that buying power because they're so big and they buy so much that they can pretty much, they call the shots big time. They have huge power with that. And that power could be, the American people could have that power with our health insurance if we had this system where we're using that buying power of the masses. And can you could you just kind of explain that a little bit on how that works for us? Because I think so many people have went through years of brainwashing on these systems that somehow it's not for them, it's hurting them, they're getting bad care. You know, I don't hear one peep out of anyone that's got, you know, 100% health care in their country complaining. I read the news like every single day, and I never find where any of these people that are getting, that live in a country where 100% of the people are covered in health care, that they're complaining. I think I think they're pretty freaking happy, man. They're like, don't you say anything, they might take it away, you know, like this is like a good freaking deal, man. We don't want to lose this. I just feel like that's their attitude. We're not hearing, I never hear nothing about unhappy customers that are getting 100% health care. I mean, I just don't think that happens. So, you know, we know that we have happy customers that are in those countries. I want to have 100% coverage in this country, and I can wish for that because you know what? We are a powerful, rich country, and if these other countries can have it, why can't we? And I think you really hit the core of all this. It's our spending in our budget, and it's like this tax cut thing is what's really like sucking. It's just like sucking all the money out of, taking it. To me, it's like legally stealing from the taxpayers. That's the way I look at it. And how could I be right by saying that? What did I just say in that is actually right?
Well, I mean, every data metric proves what you're saying. I mean, every industrialized country in the world, going back to how you set up this our talk with what do we want and what do we deserve, they recognize health care as a human right, not as a privilege that's based on how much money you make or, more likely, how much money you inherited. So they recognize that every woman, man, and child in their country should have access to health care, regardless of income from birth to death, that no one should ever die because they can't afford health insurance. No family should ever go bankrupt because they have suffered an illness in the family, and that people should not have to suffer through these massive premium hikes, and people should get good, solid care that trumps, no pun intended there, corporate profit over people's health. So the data's in. These countries spend about, on average, 40% of what we do on health care, yet receive far better, enjoy far better health outcomes in almost every measurement, and they insure everyone. So the data's in. And we also have a program called Medicare that for 50 years has proven itself to be far more efficient than the private market. So the idea of a Medicare for All system would vastly improve what Medicare already offers because it would pool all 300 million of us into one single entity. And that's why the numbers always work out that we would save so much money, because right now we've got 1,300 private insurance companies that don't care about your health, they care about profit. That breaks up our buying power and purchasing power into all kinds of ways. Then we have all these different government programs that we spend almost half of our health care money on already, but you have Medicaid, which is separated and done differently in every single of the 50 states. You have a state children's health program. You have COBRA. You have workers' compensation. You have Medicare Advantage. The point being, we have this disjointed system that is wasting so many dollars that we could be using to save consumers money, provide better health care, and simply take the profit motive off the table, because human life and human health and human happiness should not be a commodity for corporations to profit off or governments to subsidize those profits.
And that really takes away from so much from our country, because when people are sick, they're not 100%. And when you're sick, you can't work. And then you end up on programs that are just barely sustaining life. You have no hope of like getting, ahead in life because you're just living on some sort of fixed income. Like everyone wants that. Instead, I would like to propose that people actually like having a rewarding life where they feel satisfied in their job and what they're contributing, and that they have a good job, that they bring home a good paycheck, and maybe it takes some intelligence to do that job and some challenge. It's like challenging, not some robotic job or digging in some coal cave somewhere. I'm no disrespect, but I just think that we could create better jobs, and something that we've talked about, Zach, is like when we're looking at a new job, like I had given the example of, okay, over in Indiana, Monsanto is going to be given over $1 million in tax breaks to build some sort of processing plant there that's going to create a whole 20 jobs. So Monsanto becomes embedded in that community, starts controlling things, having their influence. And is that worth 20 jobs to have Monsanto come into your community and become part of your community? Is that really worth the 20 jobs? And as we're looking at like creating jobs here, because it does take money to create some jobs, there is some investment required. But I feel like we're totally missing the mark on small business, helping people to get started. in their own businesses, and being self-sufficient. And to me, when you have healthy, self-sufficient Americans, that is a strong country, not a country full of sick people that are, because we're sick, we're spending all this money on health care that we could be spending on, creating new jobs, educating our kids, cleaning up the messes that have been left by these corporations. So go ahead, Zach. What do you think is?
Yeah, so I think when you talk about, so what do we want and what do we deserve?
Yeah, that's what I was going to
ask. Healthcare. So part one, you've kind of covered this idea that it should be access to health coverage should be a right, not a privilege. And so we went through all that. I think the left out part of the equation, and it goes to what your point you just made, is the need to shift the overarching mindset and approach to health in this country from one that focuses solely on treating sick individuals to one that prevents disease, violence, and injury before they occur.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is the most effective way to save lives, reduce misery, and often reduce costs is by expanding the patient model to a community one. Because studies have shown that while 10% of health is determined by medical care, only 10%, and 20% by genetics, 70% of people's poor health or good health is determined by behaviors and the environmental and community conditions in which they live. So, but now here's the kicker.
Okay.
The way we spend healthcare money in this country is 96% of our national health expenditures go to medical services and just 4% to prevention. So when you think about why 7 in 10 deaths in the United States are related to preventable chronic diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and cancer, as well as injuries inflicting suffering on families that take our medical system and drain our coffers, I think we need to look at it as this Dr. George Alvey once proclaimed, no epidemic has ever been resolved by the treatment of just one individual at a time. I'm paraphrasing. And let me use an analogy to kind of provide an explanation of this prevention concept. If you are at the side of a river and you see people floating down the river and you keep diving in to save one at a time, at some point you have to realize maybe you should go upstream and find the bridge that has a hole in it where the cars are falling through and plug that hole. So it's the idea of going upstream and finding out what is causing all this illness in the first place. And I would use an example. A study done here in Alameda found that a black American child born near West Oakland, a low-income community, can expect to die an average of 15 years earlier than a white child born in the Oakland Hills, where there are higher household incomes, lower unemployment rates, more park spaces, and food stores. Now, this is a pattern repeated in cities across the U.S. and the world. And so you can understand...
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so you
15 years. That is a lot.
Yeah, and so then you start to go, well, so how do we start to go to the core, go to the root causes of what's causing all these problems? And I would say you look at a West Oakland community and go, okay, why is this? Well, we know that continued exposure to systemic racism and discrimination exerts a toll on physical and mental health. We know that residents in communities across this country face limited economic opportunities, a lack of health options for food and physical activity, parks, open space, an increased presence of environmental hazards, think of Flint, Michigan, substandard housing with greater prevalence for safety hazards like lead, lower performing schools, higher rates of crime and incarceration, higher costs for goods and services. You get the gist. So, there's a phrase that we use at Prevention Institute that has done a lot of the work on this subject. It's not your genetic code, it's your zip code when it comes to your health and well-being. And so this is disturbing because this is creating incredible disparities and inequities in health in this country. And when you combine that with how unaffordable our healthcare system can be, you can start to see how these start to compound one another. And maybe I'll give a couple of examples of how this could work differently. So a doctor may notice a trend of asthma in patients, but he'll realize that they live in a particular housing complex, report it to the city, and they'll find, oh, it's the buildings that are causing the asthma. So rather than just continuing to give medication to these children that are suffering asthma, go fix the houses and cure the asthma from the beginning. That would be a huge saving of the money. And
that's what I'm talking about. That's public health at work right there. That's
right.
That's logical. That makes sense.
Right. And same thing with if a doctor is continuing to treat heart attack patients, so he would first trace back, how are you eating poorly, and are you getting enough exercise? But then you take one more step back, and it finds out that the environments that these people are living in that are having these heart problems, that perhaps there aren't any safe places for physical activity, and unhealthy food is all that's available in the neighborhood. So you start to uncover the causes, then you can start addressing the causes and start creating, again, which I would say is what every American should want and demand, which is every person, no matter their income, no matter their race, gender, or gender preference, deserves an equitable, equal opportunity to achieve optimal health and happiness. And that is the second part of the equation. One, universal access to health care. Two, is the opportunity to achieve as good as health as anyone else, regardless of income.
And you know what, Zach? Then you're talking about a system that is motivated to keep us healthy as opposed to keeping us sick. Because it's going to save more money that way. And I don't even know if that's true or not. I just said that, and I'm not sure if it's true, but
no, it's absolutely true. And there's studies that have been done that show that there is a 5-to-1 return on investment when you pursue such prevention programs in just the first 5 years. And some examples of huge successes are the car seats and airbags, tobacco control and cessation programs, eliminating junk food from schools, food stamps, Meals on Wheels, even things like job programs and creating more parks and physical activity, farmers markets. These are all prevention programs that, when invested in, save 5-to-1 at least. I mean, I would like to see us, if we invested more than 4% of our budget, I think we would start to see some real payback. So the evidence is there, and it's just like you said. It's just logical. It's just, of course, we're going to get better health results if people are living in community conditions that allow them to reach optimal health, and that means we need to address poverty. We need to address police brutality. We need to address gun violence, systemic racism. All these kinds of issues that we know are the biggest determinants of the kind of health that you're going to have growing up in our society.
Well, and we've talked about how it's actually like a trickle-down cascading effect, because when we're sick, when we're weak, it can affect us mentally. It can contribute to depression, and we're seeing this in our children. They're like the most diagnosed with depression meds, the fastest growing than any other group. We have to be asking ourselves, what are we doing wrong when we have these kinds of numbers, when we have this amount of people that have diabetes? And one diabetic patient can cost thousands and thousands of dollars per year, when maybe instead you spend all that money on giving them a free gym membership, or something like that. might even be cost effective. So it's like keeping, and I don't have all the answers, but I know that when you start looking for the answers, that you can find solutions. And I don't feel like we're looking for those answers. We're not putting enough time and effort into saving money in our healthcare system, because I'm sure there are hundreds of different ways that within the system that we could be saving money. So let's, we have about 12 minutes left, and I'd like to kind of, out of all the things that we've talked about, if we had like a really clear list in front of us of the kind of things that we should be saying, we absolutely have to have this as part of our health care plan. I want to start empowering citizens to know what they should be asking for, that we have this stuff memorized. We're going to be calling our legislators. We're going to be, talking to even our own healthcare providers. Let's start to communicate. I want this, I want this, I want this as an absolute in my healthcare program. I must have these things. What should we be asking for? What should we be wishing for here? But I don't want to just wish. I want to say that I want to be an optimist. I want to say we're going to do this. We're going to make this happen, that we're not going to settle for anything less, because this determines whether we live or die, everybody. Healthcare, did you just hear what Zach said? 75% of the whole reason that we're getting sick is because of things we can control, things we can fix, that we can change. That's the good news. We can change this. We can reverse it and fix it. So how do we do it? Help us get started here, Zach. So first of all, if we just had even like 5 things that should be an absolute for any healthcare program, that people should be asking, does this have this in the program? If it doesn't, we don't accept it.
Well, okay, so I think every American should be enrolled, regardless of age, income, in employment, or any other status. That we should have to pay no out-of-pocket costs, such as high deductibles, premiums, and co-pays. We should have comprehensive coverage. I mean, this is, again, what every other industrialized country does in the world. There's no reason we can't do it. So the plan should be comprehensive. That includes hospital and outpatient medical care, primary and preventive care, vision, dental, hearings, women's reproduction health services, mental health, lab tests, rehab, and other basic medical needs. It should include massively lower prescription drug costs by allowing the federal, if we ever got a Medicare for all on a federal level, which Bernie Sanders and John Conyers have a bill, or state government. It would allow them to negotiate cheaper drug prices, use the massive bargaining power of the American people to purchase drugs that would be more in line with what other countries pay, which is about a third to a half of what we do on average. We have one medical card that allows patients to be able to choose a healthcare provider without worrying about whether that provider is in-network or will be able to get the care they need without having to read any fine print. And I've experienced that myself, trying to figure out how they can afford the out-of-pocket cost. And no insurance claim denials are going to ever be, again, based on corporate profit. So these are all pieces of a plan that we should all deserve and we should all ask for, and which is being advocated by both California, which recently passed the state Senate. So every California Assembly member should be hearing from voters that they support the Healthy California Act.
Okay, you hear that, California? We got to get on the phone, and what should we be calling and telling them?
Well, I think that every American has a right, a human right, to health care, and it should not be based on how much money they make or whether they've inherited money that the private health insurance industry and big pharma should not be profiting off the public health and the suffering of Californians. Then there's a bill that provides universal health care to every Californian that will save the state money and save consumers even more. And, it's a simple message. Better care for less money. Everybody puts in, and no one's left out.
And like you said, these other important key things that you said are very influential in how much money our government has. It's saying, oh, well, we can't afford this health care because we're having the biggest shift in, I call it in taxpayer dollars going to the wealthy. We have, and you've actually explained this really well too, Zach, on how, when we give money in that way, when we're handing it over to the rich, that does not necessarily mean a better life for the poor and the middle class, does it?
Well, think about this. The 6 family members of the Walton family of Walmart have more wealth than the bottom 30% of Americans combined. Yet,
one
Trump's
family,
and Trump's budget wants to cut their taxes by $52 billion while cutting programs like Meals on Wheels and food stamps. His tax plan also asked to cut $38 billion to the Koch brothers, the oil tycoons that spent almost $1 billion last year helping Republicans get elected. Trump's budget would give himself a $4 billion tax break. And approximately $3 trillion total in tax cuts would go to the top 2%. So this is at a time where he's actually trying to cut $1.7 trillion from virtually every program that helps reduce poverty. Every program from food stamps, again, like I said, to Meals on Wheels. We're talking about millions of people being thrown off programs that literally sustain their lives and livelihoods. And, back to the cost of war, when I talk about that $1.8 trillion that we've spent on war since 2001, a group called the National Priorities Project basically put together a list of things that money could have done. And this isn't even taking account the trillion that we spend on the military-industrial complex every year. But just that 1.8 million would have paid for 13 million elementary school teachers, 14 million clean energy jobs, 11 million jobs which would have supported high-poverty communities, 120 million Head Start slots for children, 100 million military veterans to receive VA medical care, 500 million children receiving low-income health care, 1 billion households with wind power, 300 million adults receiving low-income health care, and nearly 800 million households with solar energy. So just the cost of war, you can see what a shift in our priorities and our values could do for the American people if we just thought, you know what, it's a better investment. It makes us more safe and more secure to invest in the health and well-being of American citizens, not in destruction and the cost of life of people around the world.
And what did we get back for that $1.8 trillion investment, Zach?
Well, in the end, it's going to be probably about $6 trillion when all said and done, because you're talking about soldiers coming back with broken bodies and broken minds, and they're going to be coming back to a country with a social safety net under constant annual assault. So that kind of is a double slap in the face to the soldiers that have been serving numerous tours of duty over there. And of course, financial considerations aren't the only reason to support bringing the troops home. Namely, these wars don't make us any safer. I mean, for every bomb we drop and every innocent civilian killed, insurgent forces and terrorist networks gain new results and new recruits that are weary of an American occupation. And so
they use the hate that's generated from our actions to recruit more people to fight against us.
Yeah, and that's right. And I would just quote the late five-star general and Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who once said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children." And I think that applies more now than it ever has before.
And so what is that telling us? What should we be hearing from that? What's the message?
Well, then I think that when you put all this together, that we are at a time of enormous crisis, and that goes to the corruption of our political system and our media. So I would say one thing that I think is going to have to happen is people are going to have to start asking themselves if this is an acceptable reality, if we want to live in an oligarchy rather than democracy. And I would argue that so many of these different movements on the left, there's so many different ones. I think we're going to have to start linking campaigns to build movements and then linking these movements to create a movement of movements. And that means Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, Fight for 15, environmental, social, and economic justice campaigns. We just had the Climate March and the Science March. I think we need to all come together around a larger umbrella that embraces justice, freedom, human rights, and liberty, and that puts people and the planet above corporate profit. And so we're going to have to, that might mean everything from strikes to marches to getting more involved in local politics, and follow some of the models that other countries have used to overthrow, not physically or violently, but their governments when their countries have moved away from democracy, and learn from movements of America's past, like I mentioned, women's suffrage, civil rights, the peace movement. So there's a lot to glean from.
It says we can do this. It says we can do this because we've done it in the past. We know that we've accomplished that. And I can't thank you enough for all your wise wisdom that you've shared with us today, Zach. It's been incredible. And everyone, this is the kind of information, the quality information you get from Smart Health Talk and KCAA. And I hope that you're going to be joining us again next Tuesday, 4 o'clock, that you'll go visit our Blue Monarch Project page, that you might even want to donate and help us plant milkweed for the monarchs. Please, we're trying to buy bulk seed, and we need some money, and we could really use your help. So go to our bluemonarchproject.com, and thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.
Will the birds and the bees survive?
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
I'm Tom Busby, CNBC. Just as Anthem and Blue Cross Blue Shield announced plans to leave some Obamacare exchanges, one insurer, Centene Corp., is expanding coverage, entering exchanges in Missouri, Kansas, and Nevada, and offering more plans in 6 other states, including Texas and Florida. On Wall Street, new